everyone for joining. I'm really excited. We've got Beth Green, as you know, has come to talk to us this morning, and it's a large amount of this relates to quite a few projects we're doing, so really perfect timing. But Beth works with the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development in Western Australia in the Agriculture Division of the Department in the livestock identification and traceability area, and has successfully 2 years ago was awarded a Churchill fellowship to go and study motivations of producers. However, with COVID, obviously the international travel was somewhat delayed, but I'd love to hand over to Beth now. Thank you for taking the time to come and present to us. And just to be sure everyone knows, we are going to record this because there's interest from people who can't be here as well with the company this morning. Yeah, great. Thanks, Beth.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for the invite to come and speak to you. My day job is Manager of Livestock Identification and Traceability for Deep Herd, and I'm the Registrar of Stock and Apiaries. So I work across the registration of all livestock producers in Western Australia, but then I represent the state on the jurisdictional traceability group nationally, where we develop policies and legislation, the technical side of traceability systems. And I also sit on the Safe Meat Advisory Group for that same, and I'm involved now in helping with the alpaca and llama traceability standards. We've just done our first draft for that, so they're coming on board as well. So I live with a set of regulations that a lot of people don't know exist, and I spend a lot of time helping people understand what they need to do to meet it. And my background, I was born in Lake Grace and grew up on the rabbit-proof fence road south of Calais, and married a farmer from Corda. So we have the farm, we live down south at the same time, and run a granite quarry in our spare time. So at the moment, it's a pretty busy time of the year. So I did my Churchill. I knew from the work I do, I've been working in livestock biosecurity since 2005, when I moved from, I was doing sheep research for the Armidale CRC, working with how to reduce the time for funding to make on-ground change. So it's communication and engendering access to the audience and putting things in the right context for people to take on board. And prior to that, I'm trained as an agronomist, and so I was basically whole farm management type of work for the department for a little while, as well as a few other private companies like Elders for a little while as a regional agronomist. So that's my background. I wanted to be a farmer. I had 3 brothers, so I figured there's no chance of that. So I decided to be a farm advisor and made that decision when I was 9, and here I am still doing it. So yes, they define the difference between passion and work as doing what you want and doing what you have to. But at the moment, my life, I've generally done both. So with my work, I knew that sheep EID was coming along and it was going to be mandatory. It was, in my view, it was inevitable. But from the Western Australian point of view, I wouldn't support it from our existing system until the technology was there, the performance was consistent, and then that we had enough money to do it properly. We have an NLI system for sheep. It was never invested in with time and money. People will still say they don't know that there's a database out there. The assumption that once the cattle system was set up that you could flick a switch on sheep was so misguided, because it's different operating, different people, different everything, and so they never got that handling. So it's no surprise that we have a system that I will always maintain is better than the eastern states, because we had a transaction tag system, whereas it can still be improved. So knowing that mandatory EID was going to be in the future, I ran this project, and this was when I'll start. This is my initial. This is what I thought I was studying, and you know when you start to research and you ask the questions and you realise what else is out there. So really, this is just part of a small part of what I ended up doing, was how to get compliance or participation, and that had to be raising biosecurity and traceability up the priority list for people on farms. So I put together I knew it was coming. I needed to do it last year. We couldn't. So the decision was made in July this year, in principle. in the same month that FMD became the big drama, and I was leaving the country on the 1st of August. And I always said I'd take my long service leave when we had foot and mouth disease. And so whilst I worked for the department, this work I've done all in my own time, and I did it on my long service leave. So this report is mine. It's not the department's, but it's mine to share. I didn't want there to be any restriction over who could use it or how it could be used or how it would be put out there to fit someone else's agenda. So, and all the people I spoke to overseas, I said the same thing. We've all got a common goal here. Food security was number one. Having COVID helped because people have disease literacy now, like they understand in contact, they understand incubation periods, they understand having to trace. So COVID achieved what we have failed to do as an agricultural industry by trying to educate a portion of the population. It educated the entire population, including farmers and agricultural industry, on what traceability was and why we need it and how quickly a disease can spread and get out of control. So whilst it stopped my study, it certainly provided the groundwork for everyone to understand what we were on about. So I did it this year, August, September, and I went to Scotland, to Alberta in Canada, to Colorado and Kansas in the US, and then down to Uruguay to have a look at the different systems. So the motivation for traceability is what we're trying to bring up the priority list based on sustainable food supplies, secure food supplies, and confidence in the food supplies. So it's not a West Australian issue, it's not an Australian issue, but this is from an Australian perspective. So what I was looking for, with the existing systems that are out there, how much involvement was there by the producers and then the wider industry? How much of it was regulated and why? And the acceptance by those. And I say acceptance because I really didn't want to go out there and say, what's your compliance rate? Because no other country is going to tell us that no more than we will tell someone else. But how well do you think your producers understand what they're doing? Do they understand what traceability is? How much do you invest in compliance, inspections, technical assistance, that sort of thing? It gives the same sort of results without saying how well does it work. So everyone said that they have a system. The difference between the systems is the time it takes to respond to a threat. And so my study twisted a little bit to say, how do we increase the rate of response potential? Which means the whole system has to work well. So my starting point was a guy in the US, in Kansas, called Brandon Deckenbush, who was the first president, chief director of Cattle Trace, US Cattle Trace. So I wanted to know what, as a producer, an industry person, he works with cattle feedlots, comes from an agricultural background, what made him flick his switch to push for what he's doing. And there were others who were going, well, I didn't get to the Canadian goat industry, but they're another one where they're going, we're not waiting. Canadian dairy industry, they didn't wait. They did what they want. Why? The question was what made them change. It wasn't mandated. So why did they choose? So how to promote proactive participation for high compliance, because that will give us better data integrity, which will give us a better, faster response. And that's ultimately what we're looking for. So the reason I chose the countries I did in Scotland, I had worked previously with Charles Milne, who was the CEO of Victoria previously in Scotland, and he's now living in the south of France drinking wine. I had a bit of a background as to what they were doing in Scotland. They had a significant disease history that had an impact on their whole population. So I thought there should be some knowledge, a bit like our fresh COVID knowledge. But it's mandatory EID for sheep, but only voluntary for cattle, whereas we're the other way around. So why and where are they going with that? In Alberta, it's the biggest beef producing province in Canada. It has a history of BSE. They still work with TB on occasion, made it more difficult with deer and elk running around the place. But they have mandatory EID for cattle and sheep, but there's no movement recording. So why and who uses, like there's best practice. So it's voluntary movement recording in a mandatory tagging situation. But they do retire the tags at slaughter. So the processors have a responsibility to retire the tags that come through, and large feedlots over 1,000 head. Colorado and Kansas, their livestock associations, beyond starting with Kansas because of Brandon and US Cattle Trace, the livestock associations of Colorado and Kansas have remarkable policies, very forward-thinking policies on mandating traceability systems. But at this point in time, it's voluntary use of EID. And Uruguay, they have a history of FMD. It's a really special little country. I don't know if you guys have been there or worked with it. They've had FMD. They started the typical culling process to control it. It was too hard to control. They're vaccinated. They vaccinate cattle by default. They don't do anything with their sheep. So while some politics will say that they are the sentinels, they last year exported 30,000 head of lamb, all blood tested. At this point in time, they've never detected FMD in sheep in Uruguay. They can't sell as FMD-free sheep because the country is FMD-free with vaccination due to cattle. And they also have to be constantly testing because Argentina is right there with FMD history. Brazil. So while Uruguay is sitting there going, we're FMD-free with vaccination, how come one province in the south of Brazil is allowed to be FMD-free when the rest of the country's not? So the consistency in what's out there is also seen. But either way, because they've based their cattle system on the Australian traceability system, but it's heavily government subsidised. And the reason that's why I've gone there, one, they tell us that they have the best system in the world, as we do say that. Well, how do they do it? There's so much government subsidy. It is a little country, and they're top, at the time of my research, the top budget items were health, education, and the beef industry. The beef industry is such a contributor to that, the whole economy, that they can't afford to let it fail, which is why they give their tags for free. But they have, producers who have 12,000 head of sheep on the border with Brazil. There's no traceability system, there's no required identification for sheep. So the biggest differences, and I'm not really sure where your interests lie, whether it's the whole system or whether it's the technology. The biggest issue, like I wasn't going over there to look at their toys, but why they chose the toys that they've got is part of how you get people to participate or not. So the Scottish sheep industry were pressured to go EID mandatory with the FMD outbreak, and there was no existing system that was acceptable, so they took low frequency. There's low frequency cattle in Uruguay, and we use it here in Australia as well. Scotland, the preference is for ultra high frequency, and I did say there's a few issues that I had seen that I really liked that I'd probably get shot if I came back to Australia and said, oh, stop the truck. That's changed. UHF in Scotland for cattle and in the US for ease of use. And I would say signal strength, given you guys as my audience today, it's obviously not a public discussion, but I wanted to know why do we have low frequency and don't seem to have the same issues that they do? And it comes down to their ability to get the full strength of low frequency. They're not allowed to because of a particular naval base interference with frequencies.
Can you just describe the difference between low frequency and ultra high frequency?
It comes down to how far away. Well, obviously the frequency is the wave height with the frequency.
The scanner,
yeah. So it's ultra high frequency can go further. It cuts through a lot of things. It doesn't have interference with metal, which is what we've always had to deal with, is retrofitting into existing systems, and most cattle yards metal, so we'll put wooden framework in casings of plastic. And so now we're going to sheep EID, and what are we doing? We're retrofitting metal yards with low frequency scanning systems. So the issue with Scotland, The other thing with UHF is you don't have to do single file scanning. You can just put your whole lot through down a wide lane and they can all get scanned. The rate of scanning is really, really rapid. And you can also lock data fields, like have data fields on your tags that are locked and others that you're able to use. So the functionality of the ultra high frequency system is greater than low frequency, but it comes down to what are we doing it for? What are we like? There's a huge issue with privacy. So particularly in America and Canada, I don't want to be told what to do. You're not having my data. Nope. So if you're only going to collect little bits of data. Yeah.
Robin was asking a question.
Yeah,
Sure. SMS on why use LFO?
Because it was what was available. It really wasn't. The cynical answer is that the tag manufacturing companies want to keep it for themselves because there's a potential for data harvesting, whereas the low frequency, you can't store things on them. It's you store the number against data on a software program, whereas UHF, you can put data fields onto the tag. So
is there a price difference as well?
yes, there is a price difference. So UHF is much cheaper, much cheaper.
Wow.
So yes, there are benefits for it.
And so just explain, sorry, the regulations around the tags. So the tags have to be approved presumably, yeah. And so is that the same meat that would approve the tag?
No, so we have Integrity Systems Company, it used to be NLIS Limited. They have the tag device standards committee that run the trials for accreditation. So there's conditional and then there's full accreditation. It can be revoked, but it requires in Australia it's a 3-year test program. In Canada it's 12 months.
Okay.
It just depends on the company running the show.
Okay. And is there, sorry, I'm
No, that's
drilling into the detail, but just to make a switch to UHF, is that a whole of industry switch or can that be?
you get dual readers.
Yeah.
There are dual readers out there that can pick up both, which is what the US would have to do because they're not mandating anything. It's voluntary, and you choose if you want LF or UHF depending on the system. So that we'll get to that, but yes, there's a lot of, like I said, there's some things I probably would have got shot if I came back and went, stop, just consider, it's cheaper and it's better flow rates. When I'm the chair of the Sheep and Goat Advisory Group for WA with the cross industry group, looking at designing how we're going to implement EID in sheep. We've been going for 12 months. I told them the decision was not there as to should we or shouldn't we. It's like, it's going to happen. How would you like to see it for Western Australia? And I said, my aim is make sure we have systems that are done properly the first time that are not going to affect flow rates. So if we can't load 70,000 head on a boat within our existing or faster time frames, and if we can't scan them all, then we can't do it until we can work on that scale. So the other thing is that Scotland is working against is that there are no ISO regulations for UHF tags. So at the moment they can do what they want to do with them, because once the EU and ISO get involved, this what they call the WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. It's a question we have all the time. Why is the RFID chip number different to what's printed on the outside? Whereas they want to have the same data. So it means more to people. And if you're scanning it, you can still read it. Whereas with us, you just get chip numbers. So they have had enough investment in Scotland to make their low frequency sheep system work with the same functionality as UHF. Absolutely remarkable, and a fraction of the cost. So they do scan sheep as they run through a laneway as opposed to having to do them one at a time. But EID will be mandated in Scotland for cattle, but with UHF is the plan, and the US pilot program also uses UHF but allows low frequency. So the technology I saw was this is Uruguay.
I've got some remarkable timber cattle crushers and stuff.
Right.
We're going to import some.
This is like, so I went to Expo Prado, which is like a cross between a Royal Show, not a cross, combined Royal Show and Darren Field Days. So there's machinery and there's animals and there's showing and there's all sorts of things. They have the countries come in. So I saw an Italian Maserati SUV in the same place that I was watching a horse pull a homemade wagon down the street that was empty skippings. You know, it's like there was, yeah, opposing situations. However, this was the latest and greatest wooden crush. And this is the latest and greatest plastic one. So it's all driven with hydraulics. The point of that is that's their latest and greatest because they use low frequency. They have to have plastic or wood because of low frequency. So they've actually got industries developing how to make that better rather than thinking about changing the functionality of the tag system and the scanning ability. So, you know, they've worked with that, good on them, but it's limited. In Scotland, this is version 3 of their UHF tag, so it's big on both sides, so you can read it front and back. They brought some cattle in specifically to show me how they run through the laneway, and at the back of that laneway you can see a bit of an arch. It's a bit hard to see, but that's where they get scanned when they just move around their existing cattle yards. This is my hand, so that little Lego box contains the computer for their scanning system, and that they've put this together. They're making it, it's handmade, but they've got guys who are doing it. They've got farmers who are designing the answers. You know, this is basically polypipe and aviary netting because UHF can read meters. They have to restrict the signal so you don't read the animals in the next yard. So they've worked out that this is all you need in concept to contain the signals to the animals that are moving through there. And you can see on that scan, on that this screen, that's just from the animals moving down there. The 4, it has their UK number scanned. It's not just a microchip number.
Sorry, Beth, just so the aviary netting is creating a Faraday cage so that it doesn't get out.
Yeah.
Range. Yep. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. And the aerials are popped at the top. So, but those little boxes, you can't see that one. The little boxes at the top, that just contains all of the computer connections. But on that screen, you can see the fields that are in there. So the ones that are locked, obviously, are the breed and the gender. The age changes. Industry wanted to have their BBD testing status visible. So that's what they've got on there. Sometimes they put whether or not they've been in Scotland for 90 days or more because that alters the product provenance. So, Canada, mandatory EID for sheep, but no use the tag once it leaves. So they are making people pay for an expensive low frequency tag just to be killed off eventually. But there's no movement between property of birth and slaughter. And they also have to deal with their conditions of -40 to 35, which a lot of plastic is not good for both ranges. So they have a lot of issues with perseverance of the tags themselves. So the Canadian Sheep Federation has developed the Agro Ledger, which I expect to be up and running this year, by the end of this year. The overwhelming, everywhere I went in Canada, they say that nobody wants to be told what to do. Even if it's good for them, don't tell me what to do.
That's unusual for farmers.
No, don't tell me what to do. And they, like the Canadian Sheep Federation, Colleen Patterson, you may know, she's the executive director of that. She actually said, she referred to it as mental burden of being made to do something. We've got to try and reduce the mental burden because we can't really ask them to do anything. And I'm like, well, why not? This is for bigger than sheep producers, you know, and this is again comes back to the bigger picture of what you need to do to raise the profile of agriculture and the impact on civilization, really. So
it might be worth asking the question, and I'm not sure if you'll have an answer. The scale of the industries in these countries is quite different. So I should imagine that the number of sheep in Scotland and Canada and the USA, for that matter, is well, I know the USA, so I know never looked at Canada. They're low numbers. Uruguay,
Huge.
maybe 15 to 20 million, something like that.
Right, look.
30 million. Maybe. I know it used to be a lot more, but like the Australian industry is sort of, it's half what it was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
But the USA and Canada, I know they're almost niche industries.
Yes, correct. And everyone knows that everything in Scotland is smaller, so the scale is smaller. You go there, I've got 250 sheep, you know, but I get enough subsidy. And this is the other thing, is that we don't get subsidies in these countries too, to have 2 wind turbines put up in my property, which then generates me a lot of money as well. And so I do a lot of things with this money. So yes, so what surprised me was in Canada, I spoke to the Canadian Sheep Federation as the national body. I also spoke to the Alberta lamb producers, because I wanted to know, as lamb producers, our issue that we're fighting at the moment is, if we're sending lamb direct to slaughter, why do I have to invest in an expensive tag? You know, what am I gaining out of that? And these guys have mandatory EID, and they are lamb producers getting up every day to send animals direct to slaughter. Like, there is nothing else for them. And the answers were interesting. It's my responsibility as a food producer, was what came out of the people I went to see. But the boards were 9 out of 10 on the board were women, and they had between 90 and 150 breeding ewes each. And I was staggered, because the Canadian prairies are huge and they're sheep, so it's not like they can't cope with cold, but you know, they're obviously lamb and raised in barns for a certain amount of time, so that some are large, some are small. But I was really surprised, like I said, when I went to Uruguay, this tiny little country, and on tiny little farms have 12,000 head sheep. So
Does the Canadian situation, I assume, is mostly for domestic consumption?
I think the Canadian exports, and it's different obviously between the products, and I'm not an expert on it, but I think they export something like 52% of their meat product. So the reason that they have to meet the market access issues is because they can't consume it domestically.
I think a lot of their exports go to the States.
And the US, which doesn't have the same, they have no mandatory traceability system. They have all the same international markets as the Canadians. And the Canadians are going, well, why do we have to do this? Ultimately, good question, but if the export markets were shut down in the US, they can eat their way out of it. The Canadians can't. And so they rely on export. That's ultimately is the number of people who will eat. So the Federation, they've got the geolocator scanning on the phone, scans it like 30 frames a second. They're testing it over age and same animal's not the problem, it's the angle to maintain. And it's automatically time date tag stamped into the cloud done. So that's all that has to be done. So it removes the mental burden of being obligated to do something.
Remember that, like,
Yes, well, you're trying to train people to do it automatically, and that's what I would love to do with traceability. Like, just do it as business as usual, but we're never going to get there. We're never going to get there. Agriculture is one of the people I saw in Scotland was at Aberdeen in the James Hutton Institute, with Professor Leanne Sutherland. She's an amazing woman. We talked about change. So she said, change is not, you don't do big changes in agriculture all the time. You know, it's a stable type of industry. But I've read they utilised a subject that said we did work in 2013, and we happened to realise we were doing work with the same cohort in 2018. And the 2013 work was what you plan to change or do, you know, where are you going in the future? And a lot of them didn't flag change. But when it came to 2018, they had done things, but they did it because they could see the benefit. It was technology and efficiency. So it's time and money and consequence, really. Time and money and consequence is how they go, well, that just makes sense for me, and they just do it. And they don't view traceability that way, it's an add-on. So there's subconscious changes, and I think we need, while we're dealing with the fear of change, because we're trying to make everyone change at the one time, that spooks them, because that's just not how things work. So you need to have tangible change reasons. The benefits have to be validated by most people. Not told the benefit is market access, because that doesn't work. The benchmarking of existing processes compared to new ones, the cost benefit ratios, they're the things that'll change mindsets. And also, and I said it's a bit like looking through different sides of the binoculars, the proximity to where your market, where your product goes, impacts your importance you put on it. So if you do export of product and you need to go through all your licensing and verification and everything else, and something goes wrong at that point, your scale and the impact is huge, as opposed to someone who sends a truckload of animals to sell to someone else to do the next bit. So distance from the market destination reduces your visibility of how you contribute, as well as your priority onto making sure that the whole system works. As opposed to Dairy Trace, in Canada, it's a lot of local consumption. They made it a commercial requirement that if you're not part of if you don't have movement records, you can't sell your milk. They did that themselves. So beef and dairy has split in Canada. They used to be together. They've split because dairy just went up. They got questioned and given a hard time by consumers. So they just went, we're going top of the line traceability. It's not best practice. You will record your movements on the cattle.
If we can fair to say the dairy industry already relied on EIDs for their records when they're milking. So
they used to be
conversing with the technology, and so it was a much smaller step for them to go to trace it. So full supply chain traceability than perhaps a beef producer who doesn't have any EID tags involved.
Yeah, but it was a step beyond. So the cattle have tags in them, beef and dairy, but there's no requirement to record movement.
Right.
That was the change. So you can record movement. You don't have to, which obviously then many people go, well, that's not a priority. If I don't have to do it, I'm going to do the stuff I do have to do. Whereas dairy changed, but it was a commercial requirement.
So in Canada, where you have EID tags in cattle, but there's no requirement to record a movement. If you wanted to, how would you do it? Is there a database?
Yes, there is a database.
Okay.
Yes, the Cattle Livestock Traceability System. It's run by the Identification Agency. It's the Cattle Identification Agency, but it actually does sheep, cattle, bison.
So they have a mechanism.
Yes, they do. Yep. So making it relevant and real, how do we make people fit back to them? So if it's too far away for them to grasp, how do we make it, it's going to impact them? Market access is not it. So, and that's what I said about Canada and the US. That's what they get told. You need it for market access. They're going, well, the US doesn't have it and they have the same markets. But the destruction of the asset, the loss of income done on time, like it's actual brutal reality on their farm and their budget, because it's only going to be money and time. But then coming through all this, looking at the mandatory and voluntary, where I've come to down, but what do they expect will happen in an outbreak? Now, this comes from doing the crisis meeting in Mount Barker for FMD before I left. And I said, you all just leave your boots and barley stuff. I said, you want the entire population to look after you, but what are you doing that you can tell them that you're doing to do your best, and you need them to meet you in the middle here? Because there's regulation. We're regulated to the back teeth about what we need to do, but they're not doing it because they don't prioritise it. I said, well, how can you ask anyone else to do something for you if you're not doing what you need to do? So registering properties and making sure your movements are up to date. I know that my brand's office is now swamped and on the verge of running behind because so many people are updating their property details and their brand registrations from that. But what do they expect to happen? They expect the government to come in and save the day, but they can't do that if the data doesn't exist. So Kansas Ag Department is amazing, an amazing organisation. Pride is out of this world, and the integration and the cohesion, from my point of view, was outstanding. They have an annual exercise that general consumers are waiting, and industry waiting for the results, but they don't do it in a room with computers and things. They do it really. Pick a farm, pick a disease, do it. So they go onto someone's farm, they give them the paperwork, they give them the standstill, they stop the trucks, they do it without the disease effectively. And that's what makes the penny drop for that. So they target their problem areas like their dairy people. So they did it on dairy. So we need to work out what needs to happen for all of their assumptions to come true. So, but they don't realise what they assume until something happens. Well, but the government will fix it. What was the biggest question? How much compensation will I get? Well, for what? You know, like, it comes through that. The difference in two systems, mandating and voluntary. Don't mandate a system until the whole system is designed and in place, including the regulations. There's biosecurity fatigue. When you mandate steps, you must have a tag, and we're doing regulations about movement and stuff, and typical type of government, everything happens. It's now 9 years that Canada's been waiting for their regulations. People don't care anymore. They are sick of hearing it. They wanted it. They supported it. It didn't happen. So we need to avoid biosecurity fatigue and not to mandate the steps. And where I'm working at the moment now with the sheep is don't build in contingencies. I've got people saying, oh, but if we can't get enough tags, can we do this? No, let's make a plan. We can have plan B when we need it. But if we build in contingencies, people will hesitate going, well, I'll wait and see. Are we going to have if we build a contingency and say, if we don't get enough tags, lambs can go to slaughter until the end of the first year with a visual tag, everyone's going to go, oh, I'll just wait because visual tags are 30 cents. So we can't have that in the beginning. We must say, you will have VID. And let's just run with that because we need people. And I currently have people saying, oh, I just want to start now. How do I do it? It's remarkable when you just go, decisions made, they just go, right, if I have to do it, how do I build it in? Because farmers are problem solvers. They need to know how it's going to fit. They plan quite a lot. Legislation, though, is the remit of government. So if you are going to mandate something, that is the government's job, is to make the regulations. So if you are going to mandate it and make regulations, your contribution to the success of the system is making sure you have enough money and enough people to police and enforce it. Because if you mandate a system and you don't go out there and check, it's just like kids. People will not behave if they think they'll get away with it. Everyone knows where they can speed and where they can't. Why? Because you think you can get away with it. So there needs to be constant enforcement, constant and decent penalties, and offer good support. So if you're legislating it and you're saying someone has to do something, you can't just say negligence is no defence or ignorance is no defence. You've got to help them because you're making them change. Whereas the voluntary system, that's not going to work unless you have majority uptake. As far as traceability goes, voluntary uptake for your production, go for your life. No country believes that production benefits are any reason to go with traceability technology. Absolutely don't even bother thinking about it. Do not sell it on that reason. It's biosecurity. So with any system, any change, you'll always see the top 10%, the early adopters, they go out and do it. They've got the time, they've got the money. Doesn't really matter, it doesn't work properly because, hey, you've got this money, you've got this time. But the next majority, they have their budgets, they have their restrictions, and they may see the benefit, but they can't afford to invest without a known outcome. So even if you're going to have a voluntary system, you need to standardise some of it so that then you have a central place for support for people to go to. So don't say do whatever you like, as long as you've got EID. So if you use these tags, use these types of scanners. It has to be through the supply chain because what we have voluntary EID in sheep now, it's only for production because as soon as they leave, there's no sale yard that can scan them. There's no abattoir that can scan them. There's no carcass feedback. So if you need to have some standardised steps in each across the system to allow people to you can have help without having to be an expert on every single permutation of it all. So if people try something doesn't work, they stop. If they're not like, they'll give it a go and then they go, no. But if they've got the confidence to change, because like there's a big chunk of people using this, and I've seen it and I've heard the guy and he's got it working and we've got support, then they can try it, they can see how they can make it work, and then they'll trust it and go forward. So, and again, the supply chain needs to be able to handle it as well. So this is going to be my bit that is a concern on how I write it well. The hierarchy of decision making is that the beauty of what's happening in Kansas is you have the Kansas Livestock Association, which is a very strong membership, majority beef, it's producers. And the producers are cow-calf, they are feedlots, and then there's this sale bonds and processors. They have the Kansas Department of Agriculture, which is the government sector. Then they have Kansas State University, the Beef Cattle Institute, which all fit together. And Brad White is head of the Beef Cattle Institute, and he said, well, implementing it's not our job. And it became very clear that when you are designing a system, you need to look at who has the skills. You don't have to duplicate it. Just because you get paid more in a higher level committee or you're in a federal government or state government, you don't get to veto and make decisions because you don't have the technical knowledge. You have to trust what's come up and put in front of you as what needs to happen. You need to make how it's going to happen, when is it going to happen, and if I'm a government, I've got to put the regulations in to support it. So in Kansas, the university is looking at the mechanisms and the technology. The department is doing regulations and communication, and the livestock industry is doing the implementation because they're the ones using it. So the department is not trying to do all of that, like is basically the case here. We do have industry groups, but when something has to happen, it ends up being the government who does the doing, even though you've had consultation with industry. Well, why not let industry run part of it? You know, why do they not have ownership? You don't let them. So the longest phase may be doing the consultation to bring industry into design properly, and it may take time. The inspectors, the regulators, just because you sit in a bigger chair in a department, you don't know what happens at the sale yards and at the export loading zones. Like the regulators who have to go in there and do the compliance, they need to be part of, well, that's not going to work. You might make that law, we can't police that. So then we look like toothless tigers and then no one listens to us. You know, it's that type of thing. So the approval chains can't disregard the integrity of the decision making that puts work in front of them. And then the government shouldn't feel the need to duplicate it or compete. Sometimes it feels like the government wants to be the know-all of everything. And so they want to be part of it. In Scotland, I would like the Scottish government, the agricultural industry is a little bit compromised because they want the 500 million customers of the EU. Like, so they weren't that keen on the Brexit outcome from agriculture point of view, but they want to make their own decisions and not be dictated by the EU, like with ISO tags and that sort of thing. So how do we get what we want? But the Scottish government pays for the printing of passports and everything else. It costs them £600,000 a year. So they invest £600,000 in these guys who are out there who have their own farms, and half their time they are contracted to EID, which is a separate, it gets funding from the government. So it's not a government body, but it's funded by you guys make it work. We are government. We'll be the specialists in governing. You guys are the specialists in traceability and production and everything else. You do that. I'll give you the money. You just make it work. And they know when you go to EID, they won't have to spend $600,000 printing passports every year. So the money's there, and they've just gone, that's your job, and we won't interfere with you, but you have to be accountable, obviously. Well, how amazing would that be if we split up the responsibilities? So it's became so simple, and it's not rocket science, but it's trying to put it all together in one place. You need to trust those with the skills and the knowledge, and then respect the experience. But the concerns, you need to address them at the beginning, because some of them will be legitimate concerns and they need to be taken in. And I see this with my sheep and goat group at the moment. So while I wanted to study last year and use the findings this year, I am living my case study at the same time as doing it. What about this? What about that? It's all legitimate. Some of it's fear of change, and they just slow down and let me think about this. But you have to address the concerns, and we workshop them. Well, okay, you're worried about that. Let's just work it through the supply chain. Let's work it through your farm. Let's work it through everything. Is there an answer? Yep. Okay, concern dealt with. And sometimes it's just them verbalizing the thought processes, you know, like what about this and what about that? But if you don't allow them to ask the question and have it directly addressed, they'll just do their chat the whole time, and you will never break their initial opinion. So you'll be fighting against that the whole time. So you need to deal with that. So who do they listen to? Other farmers. If you want a farmer to learn something, you get another farmer to tell them. So you don't want the other farmers to be talking about their concerns that they still think are problems because they haven't been addressed. So these are everyday farmers. These are the guys in Aberdeen. They have Aberdeen Angus. They have Charolais. They have hydrogen-driven utes and tractors. And they have their own pulp-driven grain dryers, carbon neutral, just remarkable. Land prices going out of control, but he's just eventually subdivided a back paddock into residential. Like, you obviously have the means to do it, but the competition with agriculture is very tricky. But $1,500 to make his ute powered by hydrogen. He said it's, you know, the cost benefit ratio is worth it. So I kept asking people, if you had 5 jobs to do and you only have time to do 3, how do you choose? Traceability, keeping your records, none of that was ever going to rate. It's going to be based on time and efficiency. And the third one was in Uruguay, keeping my water clean. This guy, safety. You know, why is occupational health and safety now the big thing, and people are paying $7,000 a consultant at the moment in the wheat belt here to get an OHS plan because of the new act. Why? Because the penalties are scary. Unbelievable, and they'll be enforced. What happens if your poor child dies in a silo? That's devastating enough. Then you get investigated and charged by WorkSafe. You know, so penalties and enforcement make people prioritise. So, but the government is government, and they should be able to make a decision. So I'm not bashing the government, but you have to look on both sides. When the reasons are transparent, so people can see that they're reasonable and they comprehend, they understand them. They might not accept them, but they understand them. They will do as they're told generally until it takes too long on the lockdown, and then they just get sick of it. They don't want to be told anymore. But we've seen it, but they will accept it even if they're reluctant, if they understand why. You have to run a country. So what makes people choose to comply or not? It's your chance of detection and the time for consequence and the personal impact of that consequence. So, you know, that's how we choose. In an ideal world, I'd like people to do traceability like driving. You drive on the correct side of the road just by habit. No one questions it. And if you do, the impacts are personal and immediate and catastrophic. So that's why we all drive on the right side of the road. It could be the same with traceability. It could be catastrophic and immediate and everything else, but it's preventable and it'll never happen. So we're never going to compete with those levels of decisions in their daily lives. So adding to a jobs load, if they don't understand, they'll be reluctant. They'll do it badly, like writing waybills. And they will procrastinate. They won't put tags in on time, and then they'll find they don't have enough. They won't do their database uploads on time because they just don't have the understanding or the enforcement.
Am I even asking about the concept of doing it for the industry? Does that ever come into play? Well, only when there is, you know, something happening.
They need the threat to make it visible to them. That's the sad thing.
It's also about economic, I can't remember quite the right term for it, but that's a deferred reward. So it's much less value.
It's insurance, really. But the guys in Cancer, we don't want to use the insurance thing anymore because, you know, It's just got tired of it, but it's still relevant. You know,
You mean ensuring them by
have it ready now. If you want the government to come and save the day when we have a FMD outbreak, well, then they need to have the data sitting there. So you need to do it now so you can get fixed, compensated, whatever else later on. So this is where it comes down to, is we don't determine the true value of the ag industry, and we need to. It's not, so ag industry is given a figure, and that's based on production and money that comes in from that production. No one's answered my question yet. If a Chinese farm moves its Chinese wheat to its Chinese port, to its Chinese paddock or silo in another country, is that export? I don't know about that, but that's a
Chinese owned farm in Australia, you mean?
yeah.
But I think, yeah, that's right. What they're trying to work out is, does that Chinese farm still buy product from the local town, in which or fuel, or because I've been saying cases one while working in Namibia, where the Chinese government or Chinese companies won contracts to build roads, and they literally flew in the machinery, the materials, the people, and the food for the people, and the fuel they were going to use were bought in by ship, and so the benefit to the Namibian economy was zero,
apart from the road.
except they had to pay for the roads.
Yeah. So, but this is coming down to what is counted in our export figures. Because if you're just shifting your product from your farm to another farm that happens to be across the ocean, do we consider that degree of production into our? But it's not just that. So Kansas has got this beautiful big thing that says that agriculture is the biggest industry in Kansas. And they don't just talk product, they talk about everyone who relies on it. So down to the towns, the canning factories, the service providers, the allied services. If you took agriculture away, basically what would fall over? And they value that right down to education. Like the university is based on agriculture in Kansas. It's huge. That all is the figure of agriculture. And so the people in agriculture need to understand what a massive contribution they make and recognise their own value, because they aren't just a farmer. But the consumers and the government need to recognise the true value of agriculture, because I've said it a million times that no civilization has survived without agriculture, because it's the basis to other things. So the government, this is a comment from Kansas, that the government pays for the roads and infrastructure to support commerce. Well, traceability supports commerce too. You know, it needs to be recognised. Yes, we have mining in Australia, in WA, but what is the true value of agriculture in order to compare? So, and the benefit beyond industry. So, I know you said 15 or 20 minutes, and I tried to pull some out, and it's taken longer. But like, there is so much in there.
Yeah, that will be bigger. That's okay. So that's fine.
Okay. Oops. Sorry. This is just some of the other points that I'm still working through. Is don't standardise to grade. So what do we hear all the time? We need national consistency. Who asked for that? The stock agents. Stock agents don't have any regulations for them. They just don't want to do anything. But their excuse for not doing it is, oh, it's not national. We want national consistency before we come into line. That's an industry comment. It's a nationwide issue. I'm not really talking out of turn, but that's the attitude we have all the time. But if you make it too grey and too standard, it doesn't fit the industry. So where we're going now is that I want the sheep EID system to be designed with export front and centre, because we do that, but Tasmania doesn't. So don't make us do what Tasmania does. It can't be that consistent. Outcome, tagging, movement records, traceability. You let us work out how we get to that point. Automate as much as possible. Your technical support and training shouldn't be done by the regulators. And what does our department do? And we think, yeah, okay, Jack and I will talk to anyone at any time and help them, but we don't know who we don't talk to, because they don't want to say, oh, I've done the wrong thing. So private
talk to everyone anyway.
Yeah. Privacy of data and trust is a big issue. Scotland says, well, we're tracing disease, not owners. So yes, it's all going to be there. And guess what? If it's visible, the guy before and the guy after can see, well, then you get a little bit of pressure that you're not going to be the one that's caused the problem, which also worked in Mount Barker when I said there's enough people doing the right thing that if we find an issue on a property and it's you and you haven't registered it and done your tracing there, you're going to be responsible for your neighbours going in the quarantine zone and anything that encompasses. And they're like, oh, we can see you. But then privacy can also reduce trust in that they don't want to participate because of that. Money allows creativity. Farmers are great innovators. They're problem solvers. Let them have a play. These guys in Scotland, they are putting in a $1,500 system. Well, the whole sale yard system they built for $3,000, and it was worth £25,000 if they got it off the shelf through Elias at the time. You know, because there's this, oh, we've got it and we've got technology. It's not rocket science. No one was born with the knowledge. You work it out. So it's low cost if you let people have a think and a play. And what level of traceability for herd immunity? This is where the guys with voluntary are going. Well, we think as long as we get to X amount. I said, you're not going to tell them that. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, because if I'm not going to do it, I'll say, I'll just be part of the X, 100 minus X%.
Yeah.
You know? They go, well, you know, if you're not expecting 100%, I'll be the biggest, not 100%. And he's going, you've just destroyed my whole thought, you know, because I was aiming for something. Continual development is another thing. But the other thing is with the general public and agriculture, they don't see all the effort that's going in to monitoring and having proof of freedom testing and all that sort of thing. And that needs to be more visible because they think that nothing happens and it just pops up every now and then. So is ASF still an issue? Yes. Is JEV still an issue? Yes. Is it on the news? No. Does anyone think about it? No. But we need to make it more visible what we're doing. We don't have to say how many lead detections and tracebacks we've had to do, but you can certainly talk about what's affecting the humans directly. Consumers for respect, yes, it all comes down to that. We need to promote product the same way as we have hormone-free, we can have traceable, is safe. Public good impact. If you don't vote, don't whinge, and that's what I've told, that's my mantra. Come on, all the time. If you don't have an opinion, don't whinge about the system. I don't care what your opinion is, but if you don't have an opinion, you can't complain. So that's the same with this sort of thing. Don't say I don't care or whatever. Bring your concerns or your ideas. And the bottom line is that people forget even tragic events. So in Canada, in Scotland, there's generational change, there's distance, there's other things in the front of their mind they forget. But when I spoke to the guys who work for the government, who were killing lambs on the Orkney Islands because it was a geographical range kill as opposed to movement. So they were killing lambs that had had no contact with the mainland in Scotland, yet the ones moving backwards and forwards to France were fine. You can see the trauma on their face as soon as they bring it up. They remember it, but the industry who have overcome it, even after 10 years of market closure, well, you know, it's just not front and centre anymore. So I don't think we will ever put traceability in the top 5 priorities of a day, but we have to make it as easy as possible and as reasonable as to why it's possible. So that was just some of my other thoughts that I needed to work through. So there you go. That's what 15 minutes in an hour. But yeah, it's like I said, none of it's real rocket science, but it's putting it together in one package to make it.
So Beth, what's the current status now? So Victoria's had compulsory EID for sheep for
That's the correct, Steve. Victoria has a mandatory EID for sheep from 2022. Up until this year, there was a portion of their flock that was not EID'd.
Okay.
Didn't have to be removed. This year, they have mandatory EID to move.
And the recent announcements about nationwide mandatory EID for sheep, when do they come?
Well, 1st of January 2025 is what we're working on.
So the reason I'm not familiar with this, we do it.
Sorry.
We do it. And so all our sheep are EID,
Yes.
and as we've been running the breeding program, and we do that with production birds.
Yeah.
So we can trace the years, we can work out which lambs are growing. They all go through the race, we get scales. Where we fall down is they don't get scanned at the abattoir.
They turn into visual tags the minute they let
get
their
feedback. They're evolved once they're replaced. And it's not like it's there's no extra labour involved because you tag it anyway. So it's matter whether you put in the EID tag on your marking or whether you put in a visual tag.
And that's the benchmarking. What actually changes?
Yes.
You know, take that complaint about, oh, I've got to do something different. Tagging will be no different.
Yeah.
Retagging will disappear. If the
The pin tagging and
Yeah.
the transaction tagging,
That'll-
which is something that we have to do for the shared work.
yeah, absolutely. So effectively what you're doing is what can happen in Canada is that you've got tags. You can transfer them if you want to, but only between properties that you have control of.
Mm.
But you don't have to. And those tags, if they're accredited tags, will become part of this big ghost herd that are not killed off at the other end. So we'll have to work out at one stage any tag that was produced before whenever, we'll have to inactivate because those sheep are more than likely dead, but they were EID tagged prior, so they're put on the database, so they're visible. We have to know which ones not to try and find because we done before it was mandatory.
You mean that in 2025, when it becomes.
Or the ones that's, how long have you been EID for?
3 years.
So in it's going to be 4 years worth of tags,
Mm.
because hopefully we'll have some infrastructure in next year. Is the plan. Late next year. So it'll be 4 years of tags that are, if they're NIS accredited tags, which is what I tell people to buy, because I said otherwise you have to take them out because you can't have two, and they'll have to be accredited when this comes in. So use accredited tags. When you purchase them, they get put on the database.
So there's another aspect.
So everything that's been killed that you've sent off in the last 4 years,
Yeah,
we don't know that.
that's true. The other thing is that because you buy colour tags by year group, and you buy 1,000, you've got 800 lambs to mark because you never know. You won't end up with 200 until
Next
maybe later on. When you come in.
Yeah.
So I mean that'll be sorted out at some stage because they'll be uploaded as being marked on your property type thing.
No, it'll be the same as cattle. They're just, the database is only a database of devices. It's not a database of animals until they've moved.
Yeah.
We don't know whether they've got legs or whether they're in your apple straw. So that's why it's a device thing.
Beth, can I share just one of the realities of traceability comes back to that and issues around, in my mind, food security, food safety, those sort of things. And I wonder, we invest a lot in Australia, a huge amount in LPA, in this concept that every producer will certify that their product is either safe or not safe or has been not exposed to chemicals or has had certain treatments. But that's still a very manual, almost insanely manual, to what I can tell. There's electronic LPAs that is filling out the stuff on a computer and printing it really.
Yeah.
Is there any reality behind how do we make this system actually, because you talked about reducing that mental burden.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
from the same right and family perspective, that's you can't do this.
You only do it because you have to. And then you don't do it properly because you just do it, get away with. Exactly. So yes, there was a demonstration on the 23rd. So what was it? Wednesday, we had one with our staff from ISC where they have an electronic system. And the regs of WA just say you need to have the document with you. We don't care if it's electronic.
You're talking about the vendor declaration.
The vendor declaration.
Yeah.
Yes, so that's actually the vendor deck and waybill is electronic now, and it should be released by the end of the year. And if you don't have internet access at the time, it generates a QR code. So your truckie can just scan the QR code. It can be emailed to the destination, to your office, to anything. It can go to the truck driver's office.
Yeah.
So the issue of a policeman stopping a truck driver and saying, "Where's your personal phone? I want to see a waybill," is not an issue anymore. He can scan the QR code too. So, and when you get into range, it clicks into the document.
Right.
So, and you can upload your MSA, your fee accreditation, and all that. Anything that's standard across the forms just gets populated into all of them.
Okay.
So that's where it's at this point in time.
Sure.
And you will not have to print out 3 copies.
And the veracity, though, going back through several moves across properties should allow you to trace an animal electronically rather than having to rely on a declaration that says, well, I'm declaring that the animals, when I bought them, I've also declared to be free, which is the current sort of.
Yeah, so the storage of the data is one of the issues with the database. It's another thing I said about going out here and eat for sheep. So currently, if you buy to a sale yard, they upload the waybill so you can see. It's useful to know descriptions and the answers to question 3. And they I lost my train of thought there. Where were we going with that one?
Well, just about how this.
Oh yes. So when we go to EID, there's too much space. They don't do it for cattle because putting the same image against every RFID would just blow the system apart. So I'm not quite sure how they do that, but they do store the RFID, the waybills, MVDs, and so that will be available to see that against PIC.
Okay, so just to store again an image of a manual transaction record. That's what I'm saying. You know, there must be a point. I guess I'm relying on what we do in Indonesia, but we never have a printed out copy of anything because it's all done digitally.
Yeah.
So it doesn't actually cost anything.
Yeah. Well, that's
that's
where
what
it goes with that.
it's meant to be.
Yeah, hands free.
Yeah.
And quick. You know, it's not about what system you have; it's how fast you can use it when you have to. And so that's where they're going. They're going to the electronic, remove the paper, because the other thing is we use the paper to verify what should be on the database. So the database gives us the tracing, tells us where they went, what the document number was. But if we want to see it, we have to contact the person unless they've done an electronic one that is stored. And people are on holidays, people have moved house and it's in a box, people's house is burnt down. We've heard it all about why they don't have their copy or they never kept it or they never had one in the first place. So that's where we're moving to. And it's like I said, do it in Indonesia.
Well, we just took out all the paper. And then you don't have multiple sources that you're trying to
That's
compare,
it.
work out which one's right or wrong.
Yeah.
There's only one source. So, but it's a global problem.
It is, and they're all working on it, and that's where Australia wants to go as well. It's the change in Islam. People like having their book there, you know, so they can see it and they can hang on to it. It's like you should never make a scanning one with a window that shows you the RFID. Because people write it down in case they lose it or in case it's wrong. So they write it down wrong. 15% transcription errors, standard issue. Jack and I get a list of, oh, here's the ones can you transfer, and we do a life history. And oh no, this is not a device. This one's dead. This one's whatever because they've written it down wrong. Never showed that. You know, you've got to keep it electronic.
Well, you raised the issue of one of the questions in relation to government's involvement and quarantine. This is specifically biosecurity thing. So in the event of an issue, and Beth knows my history of being on the cattle industry management committee for 6 years and the sheep one for 3 years before that, and compensation is a big issue in these schemes. And will be a big issue in this problem. I just wonder, one of the levers in relation to this potentially is also to link compensation to valid and up-to-date records. So it's I think unreasonable for a producer to claim compensation if they don't have in a situation we're moving into when we have mandatory ELD and then the process for updating, if they're not part of the system because they ID their cattle and they haven't updated their records or their records are up to date. Just one thing to consider in the background is if you want compensation, you're going to need to have your records up to date.
Yeah, and look, in the absence of subsidies, but maybe we need to settle on compensation because that's all that well, know. But in the absence of subsidies, so in where you have subsidies in Scotland, you do your annual returns and they have a 5% inspection rate of whatever else, and you lose money if you don't have your records up to date and everything else. It's a penalty that makes people do the right thing. So and it gets published as well. And this is what Charles Milner used to say, oh, just put it on the internet, let everyone see. No, we can't let people know how much non-compliance we've got. Well, you know, it'll fix itself pretty bloody quickly.
They can see it though, because they're receiving public money in exchange for that, can't they? So they're not really, punished for not complying with the law. They're punished for, well, best friend talking about not paying any money because he couldn't comply. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one because you know, I mean, you mentioned subsidies for Uruguay, but you know, we're sort of subsidising industry by spending endless months going around doing workshops, training people how to put a tag in. Like,
Yeah.
seriously, what is this? But on the other hand, if the government wants to provide on the community's benefit, a safe food system or something like that, maybe the government should be paying some of it. That's not unreasonable if it's underpinned, but maybe the government pays some just for fun.
It's not one party's responsibility.
Yeah.
But you constantly hear it's industry benefit, industry should pay for it.
So,
which is not
consumer
what's true.
benefit. Yeah.
Consumer benefit, it's food safety. So it's beyond, you know, when they tried to say you're not a farmer, you're a food producer, you know, like 15 years ago, where they tried to change it. So you've got to understand there's a world outside your farm. You're not a sheep producer, you're a food producer. So you have to take care. It's the next bit as well about the public good. Like, you are responsible for, I would say, Department of Primary Industry and Regional Development. You don't have agriculture, you're not going to have a regional development. You know, and even if you say, well, yeah, you can be mining, yeah, but what are they going to eat? You know, like it's such an integral part of everything that we need to value it more. I mean, that's my life goal, is to make consumers understand the time and effort that goes into producing food that they assume is safe. When they go to the shop, one, they expect there to be food. They have no idea it could run out in 3 days, and they expect it to be safe. But they don't consciously think that. It's just there.
And unfortunately, they expect it to be cheap.
They expect it to be cheap, but again, that comes down to them valuing what's there. And that's a really difficult thing. And maybe it won't happen in my lifetime, but I hope it'll happen in my children's lifetime, that agriculture will be valued.
Yeah, it's funny, and I'm going to, and Steve's in the room, that sells more land in my household.
The pasture.
Yeah, the pictures of the pasture that those sheep are eating than the actual product.
They haven't been on that, because that pasture was signed into a kikuyu base, so we let that go to seed. So we spent $20,000 on seed this year. So and we've let it all go to seed, so that will run now for hopefully 3 or 4 years. We might have spending pasture back into that.
Yeah.
So that our farm manager, I think Phil, is a Kiwi, and he said, I have never seen pasture like this in Australia. Never seen clovers get up to knee high.
Yeah.
And we said, that's not clover. It doesn't grow that high. It rolls on.
Yeah,
we put our weaner lambs into these, so.
I lost them.
Yeah. They were all bawling going down the road, and they
It's like I went to Bryson Ranch. That was the most amazing thing that I've ever seen.
That's actually animals too.
Oh, no, so awesome. They're majestic, but even though they were quite animals, because they had like 160 head on this particular one, so it's not a big business on its own, but it's if you handle them properly, like there's no rounding up. You don't muster bison, you know, you have to allow them to move, like, because they're still wild animals.
Okay.
But they were remarkable. But the pasture that they were living in and the cycle of their red clover and all that sort of thing.
Plains pasture, the old traditional stuff.
Yeah, a lot of it.
Yeah.
A lot of it. But then once they improved it once again, it was 4 or 5 years. They just don't.
Yeah,
They manage it so that it's self-sustaining.
Yeah.
For at least 4 years.
Almost all regenerative agriculture today is based on work done in Southern South Africa in regards to rotational grazing and moving stock. But in the case of the States and Western agriculture, it's more about looking and trying to revert back to what made the Great Plains.
Which is Uruguay's benefit. You know, they have, like, if not the second biggest natural grasslands, which is what they sell their beef on.
Yeah.
You know, and they have to. And if you took the beef industry out, their economy would collapse. That's why the government has to make it work.
So I also have a big dairy industry, and I have a lot of money for my reasons. One thing you raised, Beth, that I think in all of this is really important. So you raised the low frequency against ultra high frequency and the efficiency benefits of the latter and the cost benefits of the latter. You'd be right, absolutely not to champion it in this format, but I think you need to raise it.
Exactly.
So that the farmers who are very conscious of one utility and two costs can champion it and they push for the change.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I wasn't really aware of it because we always just use what the system is, which is what it is. If there's a better system and it's cheaper, why aren't we doing it? Why can't we? So what happens now is that we build all these databases and spreadsheets that operate off the simple number that we get in the low frequency. Whereas if you can get UHF that has that utility in the tag, basically, then you're just making life. So you only get 5 or 10% of early adapters that will pick up on this, but you know that feeds back in 10 and 15 and 20 years time, whatever it is.
And we have
prices for the sheep industry to follow the cattle industry in low frequency tags and be limited in what it can do at a higher cost when there's a better option.
Yeah, and because the numbers in sheep in Australia, compared to cattle, it's not having to run them single file. Like we're looking at how do we convert Catania Musha into 4-way drafts and scan them into pens, and it's going to take 2 panels per drafting outlet. And
it's presuming the sheep don't run on top of each other, which they also describe. But can I just expand on that a little bit? Because one of the issues we have this forum, Ausvet, I guess, is that we're also looking at systems working in smallholder environments. So it's one thing to talk about the costs of tagging and scanning in Australia, where people would be running thousands of sheep or at least hundreds of cattle. But in a smallholder environment where every owner has exactly 2 goats and 1 cow, if they're lucky, then actually the cost of the tag is immaterial. The cost of the scan is unaffordable as a rule.
Yeah.
So no one's going to spend $500 on a scan with 3 animals or 2 animals. So how does UHF potentially benefit that? In my mind, an NFC-based solution that you use with your mobile phone will be far more successful for those groups. So how do we scale that across the networks? I know we have smallholders in Australia, right?
We do, and they count as well. And so with our existing system with the low frequency, we put scanners around community resource centres and agents to make them available. We lend them out all the time to make it work. But design a mobile phone app like AgriLedger, something that can scan a tag right there. Because when you've got 3, it's not like you've got 500 and you want to scan 3. You've got 3 and it'll be easier to separate them, because the issue with UHF is obviously only scanning the ones you want to scan. But a system of, if they're yours, if you breed them, you don't need a scanner. That's why our system's designed the way it is if you breed and sell to sale yard or abattoir, you don't need a scanner. If you buy through sale yards, you don't need a scanner. So that takes the majority of commerce out of our system for people, so that producers don't have to invest in that. But it doesn't capture everything. And
so I guess that smallholder environment, so I said just to see that there is almost no such thing as a sale yard in those environments. So it's person-to-person transactions or person-to-end user.
So I think this is, I think you get duality of like a barcode with a
on the tag.
So the visual, instead of it being a number, it's number 3 and 4, you have a barcode. And I know they need nerdy and all the rest of it, so we've dealt with that as well. But having a barcode or a QR code on the tag that can be scanned by a phone takes most of the utility there. Okay, you don't get all of the data, but maybe ultra high frequency.
But they need it.
You get the number.
But the smallholder doesn't need that data either. All we need is, and that's where the geolocation comes in, is we just need that tag at this time of day was on this location. And that's when they're looking at the geolocation is more important in a disease trace than just the properties, because if it's on my pick, but I might have 3 properties, you don't know which one it is. You can't trace exposure through proximity, like transport routes. You might have driven past Piggery. You might have gone to a transit depot. Look, there's so many things out there, and honestly, I'm not purporting to be an expert in any of it other than just being exposed and say there are so many more things we need to consider the reason I wanted to do this is because EID was coming for sheep.
Yeah.
The same people are sitting at the same tables, having the same conversations, and no one's bringing in anything new. You know what's new? Federal government's helping us co-design it. Where is their skill base? You know? But I mean, that's just the practicalities of it all, rather than going, hey, before we do this, let's scope out, should we do anything different? No, let's just replicate the cattle system, because guess what? Same people made decisions with the federal government thrown in. It's, you know, it's really frustrating.
Well, thank goodness you're on it.
But I mean, I can only bring like the UHF.
Yep.
While some people say, don't tell people about that. Well, they'll find out if they want to. I'll come back and say, this is out there. What you do with it isn't, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to try and create the environments that give participation.
I think
That's
just in
what I'm
terms of industry generally, pitching sheep against cattle and letting producers feel that there's a better and cheaper way of doing things, you'll get advocates.
I've got Queensland knocking on the door. I'm having a meeting with them.
So yeah, I think you just need to sow a few seeds, and then the right industry groups will pick up on it. And sheep would love to say we'll do better than cattle.
Well, 5 cents.
You just need to get the right champions.
5 cents. When you've got factors more sheep, and you can spend 5 cents on the tag instead of 40 cents, which is the difference in Scotland between low frequency, that difference from a visual tag. It's 5 cents more for a UHF tag. It's 40 cents more for a low frequency tag. And you've got more sheep than you've got cattle. Like,
It's also no-brainers that we keep doing things the way we've always done it, because
so we just need to not accept the status quo.
I can't remember.
It's not working well enough.
I think our electronic tags, the EIDs we give for our sheep are about $1.50 or $1.60 or something.
$1.78 is an average at the moment.
Yeah.
They're quoting $2.10. One of the issues that we
And the
have,
visual tag is like
30 cents.
20 30 cents.
Yeah.
So there's a big difference.
Yeah.
But we look at it, we value our animals at $200 or $300 each.
Mhm.
And to have the ability to run through a race and get their average daily gains on pasture and be able to look at that.
Efficiency, cost benefit ratio is there for you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it's about, we consider it, it's non-negotiable in our business with EID.
And so when we look at EID for sheep, while I can't guarantee it, I will give a 90% guarantee. Like, there'll be a tag subsidy, and so we've done our figures on 50% of the net cost. So it's $1.40 is the difference between visual and electronic. And if we can give 50% on that.
That's what Victoria did. They subsidised.
Victoria, they collect levies, which they then use to give beef and sheep tax. Levies come from the producers, and they won't divulge exactly how the system works. So they call it a tag tender, and we can't, and people ask, should we have tag tender as well? Tender gives you the impression there's one option, like there's a winner, where in fact it's not. It's not really tag tender, it's an approval to be on our tags list. So there's actually 5 or 6, if not 7 types of tag you can buy in Victoria, even though that's how they have tag tender. They actually, you've got to meet these criteria to be on our tag supply subsidy thing. And they did it for 5 years on a sliding scale. So my question to industry is, do you want 50% of tags for 3 years? Do you want free tags for 1 year and full price for the rest? Do you want 70, 30, 20 cents? Like, what is going to make it work for you as the West Australian industry? So while we don't have a choice in it happening or not, how it is easier for them to take that burden away, I want them to tell us that, because they're implementing it. Implementing is producer job. We'll make the rules, and someone else can do the technology. So yeah.
Cool. Look, I'm sorry, I don't want to cut this off, but it is we approve it.
I know. You said
it's
half an hour.
I'm sure I have other things to go to, but whatever, maybe so. If we sort of maybe call that off there, Michael, and then any further conversation we can relax format, if that's okay.
So when you've got to complete the paper in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I'm submit it by the 7th of December. It's a contractual arrangement with Churchill. to get my last $2,000 back. And the other thing I do, the contract, is to actually promote the Churchill Fellowship. It's just amazing. In fact, if you have something that you want to research and bring back to Australia, it's open to anybody, and as long as it's not part of formal education. So there are people I saw last night who have PhDs and everything else, but this is not what they're doing. There's people with no qualifications who are doing mental health for families dealing with family member with mental health, or truth telling and Aboriginal stories and all sorts of things. You know, like there's a guy who is bringing. Did you know that there is no degree in Australia for choral singing? You know, there's no music degree. So if you want to be a singer, you can't. You have to leave the country if that's what you want to study. So he's going out to look at all the different. You could do it on anything. So it's a really good opportunity if there's things that you need to go and see.
Sure. Well, look, thank you very much. And I applaud you on, decision to go look into this. I'm fascinated really that we often look at the sociology of disease problems. And really much of what you put up there is not the technology, it's the social aspects of bringing an industry along for the ride rather than trying to force them down the road, which is pretty much everything Brad Williams ever talked about livestock handling, I think.
Look, like I said, it's not none of it's rocket science.
Yeah.
But thinking that it's all about putting in new toys all the time is not what makes people do it. And like I said, this is only one bit about how do you get people to do it, which was always going to be behavioural.
The other interesting thing on that with farmers is, like, if you're grain farmers, if it's new toys, they'd be all over.
Right, exactly.
Some places still got the old, single bed that's used as a grafting gate, because that's our grandfather built it.
I have that argument all the time. You know that technology will break down. Like the GPS in your tractor will break down, and I said, "What's wrong with your old tractor with the steering wheel? It worked, didn't it?" It's like, yeah. I said, well, why have you invested in GPS in your tractor? And you ain't, and that's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. And
it was never about the GPS, it was about the air conditioner.
Great big green thing.
Yeah. So look, ultimately, it's just to expand the conversation around traceability. That's what it is. It was not.
Well, so it's really timely because of these changes, and like as soon as the FMD lumpy skin thing sort of came to the fore, there's a small group who said EID on sheep, it'll be banned in a couple of years. Should have been years ago. When Victoria moved, the rest of Australia should move.
It was timely.
Someone should have had the balls in to do it, but no one did. And
the government was forced, really. They couldn't not mandate it. It was sitting in front of them when FMD came through. Was this in Indonesia? So they couldn't turn around when the whole country's in panic mode and not agree to what was in front of them.
It would have been nice if the industry had had the wherewithal to have made a decision for themselves years ago as well. And nothing. The only thing, one of the things that's changed significantly over the last 10 years is everything's got more expensive. So the value of stock is much more than what it was. All sort of maybe a bit blind ball, but sheep and interest in sheep values and cattle prices and everything else are just only going up.
It's a good time.
And it's a bit like the levy for the contribution for the sheep industry funding scheme or the cattle industry funding scheme. They're just so minor in the scheme of things that they can do so much good. This is a bit the same. It's such a small investment for so much benefit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, it was another question I did have was, I've always felt that animals completely undersold the ability to use the technology on farm. And for example, we had one producer in the north who had a tag reader on the trapyard gate.
On the what, sorry?
On the trapyard.
Oh, trapyard, yeah.
So just recorded the animals coming in, but he could work out to the morning, because it was remotely monitored, to work out to the morning whether there was enough cattle going in and out of the trapyard to make it worth shutting it and mustering the cattle off at that night. And you could tell whether, when cows walked through, whether the number of cows to bulls ratio was what he was expecting.
Yeah, and look, I agree. We tried really hard to get the on-farm production side of things to give it more benefit to the individual.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing, is as it becomes more normal, they will go there. But to bring in that level of, when you're trying to change the entire population to do the same thing at once, those bits are not going to go faster.
Yeah.
You know, like the amount of change they will do is.
And this was a producer who was widely regarded by industry as one of the laziest producers in the northwest.
That's why I did it.
Well, that's, yeah.
Mustard is terrible once a year.
It's your efficiency.
He barely even went out to Australia, but you know, you could just wait till it was.
It's efficiency.
You could remotely shut
It
it
is.
down.
Yeah, the time and money. That's what every. I mean, and it can apply to any change whatsoever. But this is something that not every change can improve food security, and that's what all the different countries got the same aim. I said, I'm not here to steal markets. I'm here to how do we get a safe food supply line, a more secure one to minimise breaks. So yeah. So anyway, it's
Right.
It's really good.
that's okay. Thank you for being interested.
Always.
Thanks.